All right, it is my honor to open up the Bible with you. 2 Samuel 18, not 28. So, yeah, it's all right. It's all right. We're all good. Just keeping you on your toes. Anyway, verse 33 is where we're going to start. We're in the life of King David. And what we find in verse 33 of chapter 18 is a father hurting over the loss of a son. Here's what it says. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." And of course, right? Of course. I mean, we see a father that is heartbroken at the loss of a son. No one should be burying their child. No one should have to go through that. And this is the king, King David, the powerful, powerful king who is a man after God's own heart, and he has buried 4 sons. How could this happen? How did we get here with him? And at this point, it's too late. I mean, King David's already lost his son. But the question I want to explore today with all of you this morning is, could it have been different? Could it have been different? Where could David have changed this outcome with his son? And we're going to go back in time through this story and kind of learn from this tragedy so it doesn't also become too late for us. In the past few weeks, we have studied several of these pivotal points in David's life where he had a choice. And there was this decision in front of him with flashing lights and warning signs and all these things telling him what not to do. This choice that is in front of him, what he should not be doing. And in those moments, these pivotal moments of his life, he chose unwisely. The first was Bathsheba, the servant that he sends to find out about this woman that he saw, comes back to him, kind of gives him these warnings, but he's a servant. He can't really tell the king what to do. The king can do whatever he wants, but he's trying to give him warnings. We go back to 2 Samuel 11:3, and it says this: the man said, "She is Bathsheba. She's the daughter of Eliam. This is the wife of Uriah. Eliam is one of his mighty men." He went into the wilderness with Eliam, and Eliam was one of these stud fighters with him. If there's anyone that he should have respect, it's someone he went to war with. Then he talks about Uriah, also one of the mighty men. Uriah is a stud that went to battle with him. If anything, one of his fellow soldiers, he's going to protect that wife. He's going to protect the daughter. That is the code. Not even Joab, who commands his army, was one of the mighty men. This is a warning, an obvious choice of what to do next, and he chooses incorrectly. There's times we're going to make mistakes in life. We all do. That's part of life. But there are times when we know something's wrong and we still step right into it. That's the warnings that we see through the life of David. We talked about the next pivotal moment. This was last week. This is when Dad, King David, hears about his son Amnon, who had raped his half-sister. And although it says he was angry, that's all he says. That's all we see. He was angry. And that was a choice. He had a choice in that moment to bring justice to a situation. If he had stepped in, he probably would have saved his son's life. That's what's so interesting about that story. By giving consequence, by having discipline, by making someone mad, which is what he didn't want to do. He didn't want to make his son mad or pout or whatever. But if he had done that, he would have saved his life. There's such a lesson for us in this. David, in doing nothing, made a choice. And that choice was the second one that sent Absalom away. But, okay, so now we're up to speed. Is it too late? No, there's still an opportunity for King David to save this relationship. We get to chapter 14 now, and we find this in verse 1. Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. And there you hear it. You hear it right there. It's saying he's longing for this relationship with his son again. He wants resolution. It really is just pride that's holding him back. He's holding back because of what others might think about the king allowing the son to return home after all these awful things that he did. And it's so interesting how often we will allow what others may think stop us from doing what is right. We do it all the time. The next 13 verses, what we find so stubborn that people have to tell him this story, and at the end of the story, they go, "It's about you." And he's like, "Oh," it's eye-opening both times, and you're like, David, why are people having to trick you into wisdom? Interesting. The verse that sums the whole thing up, though, is verse 14. Like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But that is not what God desires. Rather, he devises ways that a banished person does not remain banished from him. That is such a good line. If you really break that down, what he's saying is, you're sitting here crying over this spilled water, and you're trying to figure out how to get the spilled water back into the cup. At some point, you're going to have to go, the water has been spilled. You can't get it back in the cup. Move on. So how do you move forward? What do you do next? Let it go. Be the bigger person. Whatever the case may be. Whatever you're going through. The water has been spilled. It's on the ground. Now resolve the issue instead of trying to figure out how to get that water, or really just agonizing about the past and thinking about what could have been. You have to move forward and resolve the case. In this case, you got to find a way to bring this person back home. Get rid of the malice. Get rid of the pride, let it go. This is pivotal moment number 3 for David, where everything could have changed in this moment. A clear warning was given to him. He has a chance to change the future. And verse 21 makes us think, okay, he listened. He's going to do it. So you're saying there's a chance. Verse 21, the king said to Joab, "Very well, I will do it. Go bring back the young man Absalom." Yes, he did it. He's back, right? Of course, you guys know the ending. I gave the ending away way too early in the sermon. But verse 24, but the king said, "He must go to his own house. He must not see my face." So Absalom went to his own house and didn't see the face of the king. What? Jump to verse 28. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. 2 years. This is after 3 years of being away. So for 5 years, he's away from dad. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come to him. So he sent a second time, but he refused to come. Then he said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine, and there's some barley over there. Let's go set that on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire, and then Joab did go to Absalom's house. Okay, let's stop there for a moment, because it's an interesting way to get somebody's attention, right? I mean, Joab, remember, is the commander of the army. This is a very powerful dude. And he just set his field on fire just to get his attention, to come talk to him. Only the king's son is going to get away with this. And he does get away with it. But what we really see here is a son lashing out, wanting dad's attention. That's what's happening. 5 years of waiting to talk to dad again. And dad's just making a point. This is not King David fixing a relationship. This is David listening for half the truth and allowing for half the truth to happen, but then pushing his son even further away. This third pivotal moment where everything could have been so different, he allowed that pride to take over. It's really like a spoiled child at this point for David. I can have Bathsheba. I'm the king. I want everyone to like me. I don't have to discipline someone just because it's the right thing to do. I can do what I want. Fine, Absalom can come back, but he can't see me. He has to stay in his own home. That's what we're seeing in David at this point. And as you continue to read, Absalom does get an audience with the king. And he goes before the king and he bows before the king, and the king kisses him, and you think, okay, here we go, maybe, and then that's it. There's nothing more. There's no conversation. There's no, going up to the pond and fishing together, dad and son. There's none of that. You don't see any of that. You see the chapter end. And then the next chapter comes. And Absalom is sitting at the gate of the city, and we read verse 2. It says this: whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" And he would answer, "Your servant's from one of the tribes of Israel." And then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but There is no representative of the king to hear you. And Absalom would add, if only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me and I would see that they receive justice. You could see what he's doing here. You have a bitter Absalom who is now moved from trying to get dad's attention to now undermining the king. And one way or another, Absalom's going to get the love that he wants. He is pushing for this love that he desires. And one way or another, he's going to get it. And what King David shows us is that inaction is a decision. It is an action. Doing nothing does cost us something. If we will not discipline, justice will be done. And it usually will be far worse. If we will not love, if you will not love that child, love that loved one, that spouse, that friend, they will find someone else, somewhere else to find love. King David has lost his son, and now his son is making sure he loses the kingdom. And by the way, Absalom's not okay in all this. It's not like we're saying Absalom is right. Absalom is ridiculous. This is an obviously manipulative, self-seeking. It's not helpful when somebody is, they don't say anything bad about you, but they just keep telling everyone, well, if I was in charge, I would do it differently. But they're in charge, so that's the way they're going to do it. We can see exactly what he's doing here. He's not okay. He also should have moved on to God's best plan. But this is a story about the king, a broken dad in chapter 18, crying and wishing that it had been him instead of his son. And if that's the case, David, then where along the way would you finally let go, let that pride go, and bring resolution to the situation? We're focusing on King David because this whole thing's a character study in him. But if you are hearing this message and you're going, that's right, that was a bad parent, that was a bad boss, that was a bad spouse, and it's good that he's getting back at that person, you're probably not hearing this right. No, everybody's wrong. Remember, in all these stories, everybody dies, okay? So you don't really want to follow with any of them. What you want to do is learn from this and go, what are the warnings that I want to follow so that I seek God's best plan for my life? None of these decisions are right. Absalom does this manipulative action for 4 years. We're 9 years into this now. 9 years we have moved through this story, okay? And in this 4 years later, the king never stops him. There's never a word. There's never dad coming in. There's never sort of a fix to this relationship. And finally, in verse 7, Absalom finally leaves. He leaves Jerusalem and he goes back to Hebron. Now, Hebron's an interesting place for him to go. Now, if you remember from quite a few sermons ago, Hebron is in Judah. It's in that southern kingdom, and it was where David actually started to be king. He was 7 years king there before finally going up to all of Israel. It's also where Absalom's grandfather is, and it's also the most likely place a coup would start. Because if you think about it, King David leaves that city, goes north, starts a new capital in Jerusalem. They call it the city of David. And you have Hebron going, we're still here. This is where we were the first to make you king. So if there was going to be a coup, this kind of makes sense that it would come out of Hebron. And we see the plan form in verse 10 of chapter 15. It says this: Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. Now they had been invited as guests. They went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilah, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. A messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. And then David said to his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. Now, I think that's a weird line. I think that's a weird response. I don't think the scripture is giving us enough detail about how dire the situation was, because as you read it, all this is going on, and then David runs away. And I'm like, that seems like an odd response. That's just a personal thing. There's nothing there for you. I think it's a quick response of leaving. I will say this, what happens next is David gets back to his roots. There's something about David in the wilderness running away where he finds God again. And all those bad counselors go somewhere else. And when he's in the wilderness, he has all these really cool side stories. We're going to skip all of them. That's your homework for this week, to go enjoy the side stories. But we're focusing on the father-son conflict. So you have to go over to chapter 16, verse 15. It says this, Meanwhile is a transition verse. So what happened was there's all these God moments with these side stories while he's in the wilderness where he comes back to God and really has a heart-to-heart. And then we get to, meanwhile, while all that was going on, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem. So they come and take over. And Ahithophel was with them. And then Hushai, the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" And Absalom said to Hushai, "So this is the love you show your friend." It's a great line. If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him? He's talking to David's guy who's now calling him the king and saying, yeah, okay, sure. This is the love you show your friends. I get it. Hushai said to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. And furthermore, whom shall I serve? Should I not serve the son just as I served your father? So I will serve you." Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" Now, before I tell you this advice, because it's a doozy, but before I tell you his advice, I want you to remember these are the guys that were around King David when he's making all of his mistakes. And there's just so many lessons in this text. If you've got some losers around you, and you know you do, you know you have a few, you're going to want to get rid of those people, because that is what happened to King David. And here's his advice to the new king. Ahithophel answered, "You know what you should do? Why don't you sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace, and then all Israel will hear that you've made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. I mean, what in the world? How is this advice from your counsel? It's so ridiculous, and it's such a lesson to us of who we surround ourselves with. It does go back to what Nathan said in chapter 12. Nathan, a long time ago, after David makes the mistake with Bathsheba, says, "There's what you did in private, it's going to be done in public for all of Israel to see." He tells him that, and this is that prophecy happening. So after this, Absalom then gets more bad advice, takes a team, tries to find King David, and then tries to kill David. But along the way, he dies. And he dies in one of the most interesting ways of the Bible. He's got a nice flowing mane of hair, like Lion King style. And he's riding his horse, and his hair gets caught in a branch, and he gets pulled from his horse, and now he's hanging there stuck. And the enemy comes up on him, and they're like, "Hey, that's the guy trying to kill all of us." He's there so long that they go and they talk about it, and somebody comes back and finally runs him through with a sword. I mean, if it wasn't so tragic, it's a hilarious end to this guy's life. But I hate to say that, because I do believe what I'm saying, what I'm preaching, and I think someday I'm going to be in heaven and I'm going to talk to David, and he's going to be, that time you said it was hilarious how my son died? So I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. But we get to 2 Samuel 18, verse 33. After all of this, now you can hear this heart. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son, Absalom, my son," you can hear it, "my son, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son." You hear the heartbreak now. Someone who finally came back to God and realized it really was him. Yeah, he slept with my concubines. I'm not even sure that bothered him. He's trying to kill me. That's a bummer. But I should have shown him more love. I should have let go of that pride. It's a heartbreaking father-son story. It really is. What's our takeaway? For me, this entire story and last week, there's a couple of things that jumped out at me that I already knew, but it just reminded me, and I just forget all the time. The first one is life's going to be full of challenges. I don't know how many times I have to be reminded of this, but just because I'm Christian doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And I don't know why, but I keep thinking it's going to be. And we have to be very careful when we're telling people about Jesus. And I do it all the time. I say, your life will be so much better once you've accepted Jesus Christ. It's going to change everything, which is true. But what I'm not saying is everything will be perfect from this point on. And everything you've ever wanted will happen for you. And there will never, ever be a bad thing that happens in your life again. That's not what the text says. And I keep forgetting that because, it is better, but it doesn't change the challenges of the world we live in. And this life of David is full of bad stuff. And the more I read of David's life, the more I think he probably just wanted to be a shepherd, wanted to play his harp for his sheep, have a little sheep time with his harp. That's really what I think David wanted. And he was thrown over and over into these situations that were quite challenging. He had to pray constantly, had to continue to run for his life almost most of his life. He made huge mistakes. He pays for it in huge ways. It's not an easy life. But what we see is someone who turns to God over and over and over again, knowing that God will give him his path forward. He didn't always listen, but they were speaking to each other. How do we know? The book of Psalms. The book of Psalms is your entire inside the mind of David. You can go inside the mind of David with the book of Psalms. And what you see is someone continuing to go to God going, what do I do? And question God. He questioned him all the time. He was like, why this? Why would you do this? And then God would show up and he would say, you're still here. You still have me. You're still holding me. You're still the greatest hope to our world. I don't want to do it without you. And God would give him a plan forward. And you see that tension, that relationship. When we accept Jesus Christ into our life, it's not that all the problems go away. It's that we have a guide, this internal guide that's now leading us and holding us through the problems, taking care of us through the challenges. You don't get a free pass for sin. No, you still face those consequences, but he's holding you through them. You still have to choose right things. And when you choose the right things, you will still have those hurtful, manipulative people that stab you in the back. That's this life that we happen to be in. But life is better. Life is better when God is coming from within you and continuing to hold you and continuing to guide you. I have to continue to remind myself of this. I like to use the analogy from my own brain to remember that this life is icing on the cake. You probably have heard me talk about this before. I love cake anyway, but the cake is knowing your eternal destination. That's cake. Cool, I know where I'm going when I die. Cake is knowing I've been created and designed with passion and purpose, knowing that he is as close as I will read my Bible and pray. If you ever feel like God's far from you, you probably haven't been reading the Bible because he jumps off the page. This is his word come to life. Every time you're feeling like he's far away, read your Bible and pray. That's cake. It doesn't stop bad things from happening, but I know that he's with me no matter what I face. That's cake. The icing is sometimes really good things happen. That's the icing. The icing is sometimes as I follow God's plan for my life, I experience blessings. What? I don't deserve that. That's grace and mercy. That's icing, that I even would get some good things happening. And then every once in a while, there's actually a miracle. That's the cherry on top of the icing, that a miracle would actually happen. We don't start there. That's an end point. And that's where everybody gets so messed up. They want to start with the miracles and forget about the cake. You don't just eat cherries. I like cake with lots of icing and a cherry and a little sliver of cake, but that's just the way I like to eat it. The truth is, it's the cake, the icing, and every once in a while there's a cherry, and it's a really, really good cherry. Second takeaway I have from this is that pride will kill you. And I continue to forget this one too. I'm like, oh, that's right. See, David he didn't do anything about Tamar, and Absalom has to get justification for his sister, and then David has to banish him, and then Absalom has to undermine the king, and then David won't let him talk to him anymore, and Absalom has to start a coup, and in the end, everybody loses. That's what this story is. And was everyone justified in their actions? Actually, as I read this story, I see a lot of myself. I respond too fast and too harsh when I feel like justice wasn't done for me, right? I pout and ignore people when I'm mad at them. I do. And I want to get even when somebody wrongs me. I see way too much of myself in this story. Now, will I learn from this story? Will we all learn from this story and start ripping that pride out? That pride is like a root system that goes in there deep. It takes a bulldozer or something to get in there and get that out. What if Jesus Christ held a grudge? We'd all be in a lot of trouble because Jesus Christ, every time you look at him, had every reason to do that, and yet forgives. When I feel disrespected, manipulated, wronged, I have to remember that God had all of that happen to him, and yet he went, forgave, paid the price for sin, invited me back to his home, invited me to his table to eat with him. If I am getting all of this, plus passion and purpose and a plan forward, can I not forgive someone else in my life? Perhaps today we need to pray. Pray that we will allow stuff to roll off our back a little quicker. Be a little less sensitive. Not hurt, not think the worst so quickly. We're so good at thinking the worst about a situation because we were right once, right? We were right once about it, and now we always think the worst immediately. We're quick to be annoyed by those who speak so confidently about things they know very little about. Let me say that again. There's a lot of people in our world that have way too much confidence in what they're saying, right? If you don't agree with that, then you're one of those people, okay? Be patient with them. We may need to pray more and understand where people are coming from. Love a little bit more. Be difference makers in our world. Or is our pride so large that we cannot allow a wrong to happen to us? In this story, what we're reading with David and Absalom is max consequences if you allow pride to keep growing. That's the story. You want to see what it looks like when you just keep letting that pride go. Here's max consequences for you to look at. Don't let pride kill you. Romans 3:23 says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." We've all made mistakes. Perhaps the mistakes were done to you, but remember that you also have made mistakes and that we all have this sin. That's why Jesus Christ had to go to the cross in the first place. He died once and for all these mistakes. No one is immune, even guys with nicknames like a man after God's own heart. No one's immune. And what happens with those mistakes? Romans 6:23 says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord." It is finished. Now it's up to you to accept that gift. How? He tells us, Romans 10:9, "If you will confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." I hold on to that one. I don't let anybody tell me that it's more complicated than that. Who needs this today? Life is hard, full of challenges, but we have someone that loves us, created us, gave us purpose, invited us back home. He wants the best for you, but you do have to accept this gift. Will pride stop you from accepting this incredible gift that he offers us? Don't let that happen.